All right, welcome everybody to the fourth episode of the Northeast Bass Fishing Podcast, dedicated specifically to Northeast bass fishing news, events, anglers, and issues. I'm Chris Adams. I'm joined by my co-host Tommy Waltz, and we've got another really great guest tonight that we'll introduce us in a second. Here, we started off the first couple podcasts with a great lineup of folks. We had Joe Lucarelli from New Hampshire, a renowned smallmouth angler. We had Casey Smith from the Finger Lakes of New York. We had Chris Beeler, an accomplished Northeast angler and sales rep for Shimano Fishing. We also had Joe Burchell from New Hampshire, who had a really hot start in the spring on some opens in Lake Winnipesaukee. And tonight we've got Tom Balachvilli. I think I said it right. He goes by Tom from Brooklyn on Instagram, and he was the 2020 Angler of the Year for the Northeast BFL circuit. So welcome to the podcast, Tom. Really glad to have you.
What's going on, guys? I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk fishing any day of the week.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So just, I guess, Tom, if you could just give us a little background about yourself and what you do for work and, everything and kind of how you got your start in fishing.
Well, I immigrated here from the Republic of Georgia when I was 9 years old. And my family moved us into Brooklyn. And I was basically raised in Brooklyn. And I've been there ever since. Everybody's always asking me, how did you pick up fishing being in Brooklyn? Well,
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, in the summers, instead of going to camp, my parents got this bungalow upstate New York in Monticello by the Monticello Raceway in Sullivan County. And every summer I would just spend most of my summers there in a lake called White Lake. And, that was my introduction to freshwater fishing, basically. And, fishing for sunnies with a bobber and all that stuff. And I vividly remember when I caught my first smallmouth. I didn't catch it. I had him on. And I tell this story and it was like, there's this giant smallmouth just jumping out of the water, and it must have been like a 7-pounder. I don't know. It was probably like a 2.5-pounder. But to me at the time, it was this giant smallmouth. And when he broke me off near the dock, and I was like, no, I can't believe it. And I'm literally screaming. Me and my buddies are like, well, I can't believe it just happened, right? And there was a bass boat going by at the time. And those guys were like, dude, that was awesome. We watched that whole thing go down. And I was like, how do I catch that from now on? And they were nice enough to come over to the dock, and he gave me a bunch of, remember those June bug, little worms with little stinkers, and he showed me how to Texas rig it. And obviously I didn't remember what he was showing me. And I just made the most of it from there. Now, remember, I'm 38 years old. So I come from a time where bass fishing information was not available. You couldn't just go on Google or YouTube like you can now and Google how to tie an FG knot, and there'd be a million videos. There was nothing.
Yeah.
I had to ask people hey, can you show me how to Texas rig a worm again? Because there was nothing, something as simple as that. So
probably not many neighbors in Brooklyn you could knock on the door and ask either of.
And that also. So I didn't have a mentor really. My father, he taught me how to fish. He introduced me to fishing, but he didn't know anything about bass fishing. So I didn't have a mentor. Everything was trial and error. The first time I got braid and was throwing a frog, for example, I broke off about 15 frogs because I was tying the same knot as I would on a monofilament line. And that braid would just slip right out. And I didn't know what I was doing wrong because I didn't have anybody to tell me, hey, this is braid. You can't tie that knot on this. So just everything was just so much harder for me to pick up and learn, and took so much longer than if I would just had someone to be like, hey, this is how you do this. Like when I take kids fishing, like my friends' kids and whatever, it takes me 5 minutes to teach them what took me like 5 years to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like the younger anglers today, the learning curve is so much shorter than, I'm 30, just turned 35, and Tommy's probably around your age, and like, we had to work pretty hard for everything that we've learned, or most of it, and the kids these days have it pretty easy. But so how did you, obviously explain a little bit of kind of how you got hooked on it, and that influential smallmouth that got off or whatever. But what about how did you get into tournaments? What was kind of the lead in there?
So basically same concept. Started hanging around guys that had like trackers and nitros, and I would see tournaments being held there, and I would be like that annoying kid running around the weigh-in and like asking, like just trying to be a sponge, man, just asking like, hey, what club is this, when do you guys fish, blah blah blah. And I ended up meeting a great group of guys that would hold tournaments there, and they were actually nice enough to let me in when I had a little John boat and I was using a cooler for a live well. Now, like none of the other club members had that setup. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and the boat I had, the John boat I had, was only like, I think it was a 11-footer or 12-footer, which didn't even meet the minimum requirement length of a boat. But they all looked the other way. They were like, let this kid, do his best and fish with us. Because all I wanted to do was compete. I didn't care really about what I was fishing out of. I just wanted the opportunity to compete against those guys. And I got my butt kicked, most of the time. And I still won a couple out of that old John boat. I still had a couple of good tournaments. And then I went up from there. I got I got a little 17-foot nitro after that, and started kind of dipping my feet into bigger tournaments, bigger lakes and stuff. The one thing about me though, that I feel like made me a pretty good fisherman was that I don't have a home lake. I never had a home lake. But I've always been kind of like obsessed with constantly fishing new water for some reason. Like if there's a lake that I never been to, I want to go there. And instead of fishing the same lake, like there's a couple of lakes that I'm really good on, but I don't fish them anymore because I guess it's like not, I don't know how to say it, but it's not like, if it's not challenging, I don't like, I feel like I've conquered it. Now it's time to move on.
Yeah.
So, I've done that with a lot of bodies of water. Candlewood last year, I think I just put it in my head that, hey, I'm going to learn this thing as much as I can. And I fished it as much as I could. A couple of years before that, it was the Hudson River. I was like, I'm going to try to learn as much as I can with the Hudson River.
Are there actually fish in the Hudson River?
Oh, it's phenomenal.
I'm just saying that because the time I went, I didn't catch one bass. I was like, I'm never coming back here again.
No. Hudson River is phenomenal. Now, it had its downturn. I speak to some of the older school guys, and they'll tell you, in the 90s, it stunk. It was like after it had some kind of pollution problem, but they spent like $500 million plan to clean it up. After they cleaned it up, it like came back to life. And the Hudson River, there's days that it takes over 20 pounds to win there.
Right.
There's like 7-pound largemouth and 4 or 5 pound smallmouth swimming around there.
I was just joking because I'm still sour about the time I went there. It was horrible. But so logistically, and we kind of talked about this earlier, but I really wanted to hear about this. How do you make it work as far as what do you do? Where do you store your boat? Like, how do you make all that work living where you live? Like,
so when I, my profession, I'm a pharmacist. So that's probably another reason why it took me a little bit to get going. I spent 6 years in a classroom instead of spending it, on the water and fishing. I mean, I still got some fishing done at the time, but it was nowhere near enough to kind of like hone in on and get better. You know what I mean? But after I graduated and I started making a little bit of money, the first thing I did was I invested in property in Sullivan County. I bought a little cabin. It's like a cedar wood home. It's all seasons, so it's a winter home. It's great. It's beautiful. I love it. But with that house, I was able to store the boat in the backyard there.
So basically, you bought a house for your boat.
I bought a house for the boat because there's no way to keep it in Brooklyn. And then a big portion of my life, from my 20s into my like early 30s, I would finish work on a Thursday or Friday, and I would just go straight upstate, and I would grab my boat and I would fish Saturday, Sunday, and then drive back another 2 hours back to the city, work, and do the same thing every weekend. And then I got married. We bought a house in the suburbs, and I'm about 45 minutes away from Candlewood Lake now, and we have a big driveway. So now I store the boat at the house. I still have my property in Sullivan County, but I store the boat at the house now. And what I've gained by this, without even realizing, is that I get like an extra 4 months of fishing, because up north, the season is a lot shorter than it is here.
Yeah.
It's about a 2 hour difference. And I'm getting like 4 months extra in fishing by doing this.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, your story is incredible. I mean, I think like, I don't know about Tommy, but like personally, like I was pretty fortunate. My dad was a tournament angler, and kind of like I had an easy in, and you literally started from scratch, like just because you were hooked on it and you loved to fish, and so you were finding whatever way you could to like learn and follow guys around and like talk to guys and get your little boat going, and like just really impressive. Was there anybody like any of the professional anglers at that time that were influential or idols for you or anything like that? I mean, it's kind of like, sounds like a Mike Iaconelli story to a point, kind of how he got started.
Well, actually, Mike Iaconelli had a big influence on me because when he won his class, I watched him win the classic when he won his classic. And he was on stage breakdancing and screaming, "Never give up," right? At that point, I had already loved bass fishing, right? But watching him win the classic, it opened my eyes to, hey, this guy is from Jersey. Like, this guy is like a regular guy from Jersey, and he won the classic. At that time, I thought of professional bass fishermen as a bunch of guys from the South that they just fished every day. You know what I mean? Like, that was my idea of like, oh, if you want to be a professional, you almost have to be born into it, and you got to be from the South. I mean, that's just what I thought. And watching him win it changed my opinion of that. It changed like my understanding of what a professional bass fisherman is. And I felt like, hey, like if a guy from Jersey can do it, a guy from New York can do it. Yeah. And it's funny because you look at like the Johnson's brothers now from Canada, and they're paving the way, because before them there were no Canadian professionals. You know what I mean? So I think Mike paved the way for a lot of guys like me, like inner city guys even, you know what I mean, that saw a guy who lived in Jersey close to New York, like he wasn't like a Southern boy, you know what I mean? Like, and he was out there winning, and I was like, wait, if he can do it, I can do it, But I mean, he was super inspirational to me.
Yeah, that's.
And cool. Then obviously Paul Mueller, being from being so close to his story, Paul inspired me, because Paul wasn't even a bass fisherman. Paul was like, he calls himself multi-species angler, but that's what he was. Like, bass fishing wasn't even like his thing, but he figured, hey, you know, I'm good at it. Let me try it on the big stage, and he's been successful with it.
Yeah. Now, what was the first club you belonged to? Where was that, and how did that work, and kind of how did you kind of climb the ladder a little bit?
The first club was a little club that was ran. What was the name of it? It was a little Monday night club, and it was ran by Jack Danchek and his son Bill. And it was out of Sullivan County, and they ran a good club. But our hours of fishing were 5 to 11. We fished into the night.
Yeah.
And we would have like, I guess 3 hours. We would have like 2.5 hours of daylight and 2.5 hours of like pitch black. And so that was cool, like learning how to catch a bass at night. It was different, you know, and just the baits and stuff like that. And then after that, I fished with a club that only had a lot of older anglers, and it only lasted a little bit. But it was what was the name of that one? But it was ran by Billy Orr, and I actually ended up winning one of the years. I ended up winning Angler of the Year in that club. And then shortly after that, we had a couple of older members pass away, and then they just didn't like renew it.
That seems to be like a common thing. Like the clubs just these days, they just aren't as big as they used to be. I remember back in the day when I was younger, club fishing was huge, and it's just there's so many other tournaments going on right now that people, when you allocate your time, you're kind of club fishing is kind of going away. So then when did you start jumping into doing BFL? Was it like 3 years ago? I was kind of trying to look at your stats earlier.
Yeah. So after that, I went to Topwater Bassers, which was a club out of New Jersey. And the reason I did that was because there was a lot of lakes in New Jersey that I never fished. And that club is ran by a guy named Eddie. And he runs a very clean, very good club. Anybody who's in Jersey that wants to get into a boaters only club, no co-anglers, it's a boaters only club, I would definitely check out Topwater Bassers. Very competitive club, a lot of good sticks in it. And I joined it for one reason and one reason only, that pursuit of, hey, I've never fished here before. And I looked at the names of the lakes on the list, and it was like, I've never fished any of them. And some of them were a little bit out of my way, and I just sucked it up and I went and I fished. And boy, that first year there, I got my teeth kicked in by those guys. It was rough. The thing about Jersey lakes is it's hard to get a bite on a lot of those lakes. We're talking about a bite. Like, so being in that club taught me the value of how important a bite is, because being from upstate New York, the northern waters, where you're like, you have a smallmouth on and he jumps and spits your bait and you're like, whatever, I'll catch 10 more. You know, some of these Jersey lakes, it's just not like that. You get a fish on, you better get him in the boat, because you don't know if you're going to get another opportunity. So I got my teeth kicked in, and then I did a little bit better the next year. And I believe I won. I won an Angler of the Year with them also. And I was very proud of that AOI, because that's a tough, those lakes are tough, and those guys are tough to fish against. And then I jumped into the BFLs, and I did a couple randomly here and there. And that's another thing. If whoever's listening, I would definitely recommend not doing it that way. Don't fish like an event here because it's convenient, and then not finish out fishing that division. Like, because
you learn so much.
Huh?
You learn so much going to those other lakes and doing the whole schedule.
Yeah. And because no matter how you do in that one event, it doesn't really say anything. It doesn't really mean anything. You could do well, great, you did well, but there's you didn't finish out the division. You didn't finish fishing everything else. So you can't really compare, you know what I mean? And if you do poorly, then you don't have an opportunity to make up for it with the other events in the division. So you kind of walk away with your nose down, but then you don't really have an opportunity to make it right, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and me and Chris have talked about this before. That Northeast Division, BFL division, I think it's hands down the toughest division in the whole country. Not necessarily hard bodies of water, but most diverse. There's no other division anywhere in the BFL circuit that you're going Clearwater, upstate New York smallmouth. You're going 12 hours south to tidal fishery. You're fishing grass. You're fishing hard structure. It's just, I think the Northeast BFL is like, if you want to train, if you want to start somewhere, that's a good place to start to make the next step. And you look at a guy like Jamie Hartman, which Chris, what did he win, like 4 Angler of the Years in a row or something back in the day?
Quite a few when I was doing them,
something like that. And then, he's on the Elite Series, immediately successful, and people were like shocked. The guys from the Northeast weren't, because we're like, no, that guy catches them everywhere. So once he went to the Elite Series, he kind of had that training on using his electronics, fishing smallmouth, fishing grass, all that stuff. That Northeast trail is no joke.
It's definitely diverse, and which is why I kind of it was funny because when Chris reached out to me, he was like, man, you gotta talk about the tidal fisheries, man. And I was like, what? I know I've had good events on tidal fisheries, but man, like that is just a whole other animal. Like, and it's funny because the real tidal guys, the real good tidal guys, like they're doing that all the time. Yeah. To get really good at tidal fishing, I don't even know how much you have to fish it to get really dialed in.
Yes, that's interesting. I thought that was probably going to be your like bread and butter was tidal fisheries, just because you're closer to them. You're close to Hudson. You're close to Potomac, Chesapeake, Delaware, but that's not your wheelhouse.
No. I mean, it's the places that I feel most uncomfortable. Yeah. But
you've had several top tens. Didn't you win a BFL there last year?
I won on the Potomac. And I had a top 10 on the Potomac. I was also in the regional a couple of years ago. I was in 3rd place after day 1 in the Potomac. And then I had a top 10 this year in the Chesapeake, followed by a 0. So I had a top 10 and then a 0. So and that, if that is just tidal fishing in a nutshell. You could be a 0 or you can be a top 10. And that's why tidal fishing scares me, because out of all the ways of fishing that we do, right, reservoir, lakes, and all that stuff, the easiest place to zero is a tidal fishery. That is 100%. That is 100%. There's just so many moving pieces and so many variables. Yeah, that the line between doing well and zeroing is so thin. It's just so thin. And I have examples for days of my good events and bad events. And when you look at them, there's barely any difference. There's just barely any difference. It's just a difference of like 3 casts. That's all it is. And there's no other place is like that. Just tidal fishing is like that. And a good example is the year that I won the AOI, right? The guys behind me in points were local to the Chesapeake Bay, and that's where our season ended. So they were only a little bit behind me. I had to catch them if I was going to win. And I had 2 little ones in the boat with about 7 minutes to go in the tournament. And I ended up weighing in 4 for 10 pounds, and that was enough to win. Wow. So I caught a 4 and a 2 in the last, 6 minutes of the tournament.
Wow.
But the reason I was able to do that was because I just stayed. I stayed on my spot. I never left. I stayed, and I waited for for that tide to get right, you know, it was supposed to get right at around noon, but it didn't get right until 2:45, and I was like due back in at 3. So it was about 2.5 hours behind where it was supposed to be. Now, when I get back into weigh-in, I spoke to a couple of local guys, and they were like, yeah, man, that wind kept the tide from going out, blah, 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 it held the tide back. But when it's happening to you and you're not from there,
Right.
you don't understand what's happening. You're like, why isn't this water moving?
Yeah. The only time I fished the Potomac, it was years ago. I think it was like 2006, 2007. It was a regional for the old ESPN Bassmaster Weekend Series. And the first day I actually did decent. It was like a 150 boat tournament. I was like a 15th place. I had a good day, and I caught a lot of fish. I'm like, this is awesome. And the second day I drew a guy that lived on the river. And in the morning, he's like, oh, flood tide. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we got a flood tide. Look at that. See that way that wind came in and pushed it up? I'm like, I don't see anything.
Yeah, you're
and he's like, well, it's going to be different than yesterday. I'm just telling you. I was like, whatever. There's so many fish in there. I didn't catch one fish. And he was like, flood tide. So it's definitely, like you said, tidal fishing is so hit or miss. At least in my experience, I have limited experience, but the few times I've done it, it's usually miss.
It terrifies me. Every time I go out, you know, and I got the co-angler in the boat, and he's like all excited. And I'm like, dude, like, we just don't know what we're going to right now. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen. So the Potomac event that I won, here's a good one. It was a back-to-back because of COVID. Yeah. It was 2 separate events, but they were back-to-back. So day 1, which is the first tournament day of the first event, I actually only caught 5 for 10 pounds. And that was good enough for 9th place. Again, when it's happening to you, you don't know. I remember there was about, I don't know, like 15 minutes left in that tournament, and I had 4 in the boat, and I'm like, well, this sucks. And I catch a little 13-incher, and I boat flip him. I don't think anything of it. Throw him in a live well, and I go to weigh in, and that 13-inch fish is like $1,200. Yeah. But I thought, whatever, I have 5 for like 10 pounds. I don't think anything of it. I'm going to be like in 48th place. I don't know. And I ended up being in 9th place. But here's the kicker. That tournament, I only had about 6 hours to practice for, because I showed up. I didn't have my boat for 2 weeks before that tournament. So I show up, I practice for about 6 hours. I find this one little spot, and I fish it. It's the only spot I fish all day. Day 1 of the tournament, and I come in 9th place with 5 fish for 10 pounds. It's the only 5 bites I had. So the second day of the tournament, the second tournament, I go right back to those waypoints, and I catch almost 17 pounds. Same waypoints, same everything. And I caught like 25 fish that day. And I win it.
So Tom, you talked a little bit about the Potomac. So it was 2020, you were the Angler of the Year in BFL's Northeast. Yeah. What were the other events, and how did, where were those, and how did those shake out?
Cayuga, we started in Cayuga. Cayuga was fun.
What'd you do up there? Was that, were you all largemouth, or were you mixing it up, or what
no, I focused on the largemouth. Okay. And I found a little deal. I found them schooling in practice, and it was so funny, man. You think, and that's the other thing, like, there were boats around. There were so many boats around. And these fish are just blowing up all over my boat, right? And I'm like, am I the only one seeing this right now? Like, what the heck is going on? And so on tournament day, I thought I was gonna have to fish in a huge crowd of boats. I get there, and it's just me. It's just me. And you didn't need your electronics. You didn't need nothing to find those fish. They were just like, boom, 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 everywhere. And yeah, so I caught them pretty good on that first event. And I think I came in 23rd place. And I had about 17 pounds. And I lost one that was just an absolute hammer. And the way I lost them was was embarrassing because I broke 50-pound braid on it. I don't know if my braid had a nick in it or whatnot, but I had about 16 pounds at that point, but it was a weird 16 pounds. My smallest fish was like 3 pounds. So I'm like, I gotta call a 3-pounder. So they were all, I didn't have any giants and I didn't have any real small ones to call. So I started throwing this giant rat. And first cast, I get grass on it. And I'm like, oh man, so I take the grass off. Second cast, I'm reeling it through, and I'm through like the lanes, so I don't get it kind of hung up. And I tell my co-angler, I'm like, man, look how good that thing looks going through the water. And the tail is all moving, and boom, and it kind of like startled me, and I yanked and just snapped. 50-pound braid just snapped, and the thing is like jumping around for like 20 minutes all over us. We're like, no.
Trying to throw the bait.
Yeah. Oh, he threw it eventually.
How much did that? Oh, you got it back? Because how much those baits cost, those rats?
Oh God, the one I was throwing was $120. I'm not even kidding.
I saw you posted pictures. I'm like, holy shit, look at those things. Those can't be cheap.
Yeah, that's an Algene. You saw it on my Instagram?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an Algene. It's handmade by this Japanese guy who actually isn't even a fisherman. He's an engineer, and he just, his buddies were like, hey, can you make me this? And that's kind of how he got into it. Little backstory on him. And but he makes phenomenal baits. But I half collect them. But every once in a while, when your smallest fish is 3 pounds, every once in a while you're like, I got to do something. Because I actually burned a couple of fish before I threw that rat. I put on the jig, and I knew I was going to fish there tomorrow. That was the other thing. These back-to-backs, you got to kind of like ration your fish. So I knew I was going to be back there. So I already had about 16, 17 pounds. And I'm like, man, I put on a jig, and if the first bite I get is a 2 3/4 pounder. I'm like, well, I just burned that fish, and I hate burning fish. I don't even set the hook in practice, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
you had Cayuga, and then what was after that?
Cayuga again. It was back to back.
Oh, back to back. Okay, so you had back to back Cayugas and then back to back Potomac's. Was that
back to back Cayugas, back to back Potomac's? Correct. Wow. Yeah,
Gotcha.
and then so Cayuga was the second one. The second of the day went completely different. All those fish were gone. They were gone. I actually ended up. I think I ended up catching that fish I lost on day one. I actually ended up catching him on day 2. I think because he also hit a top water. It was a different top water, and it looked, but size-wise, like the same fish. So he anchored my bag on the second one.
Was it like a raccoon top water you were throwing the second one?
I was throwing the duck.
You upgraded.
So, but the rest of those fish that were there, they were gone. And a lot of guys that were fishing that kind of grass that I was fishing, they all complained for the second day. They were all like, man, what happened to those fish, man? They were just like gone. Like they were just nowhere to be found. And I actually ended up running to my second spot, and I did weigh in a smallmouth. It was a key smallmouth I caught, about a 4-pounder towards the end of the day. And I actually ended up finishing that event in 16th place. And then back-to-back Potomac's, and then we finished with a super tournament on the Chesapeake Bay. And that's when I came in 16th in that one also. 4 fish for 10 pounds.
Yeah, gotcha.
And that, like, you don't have to come in first to win Angler of the Year.
Right.
Like you really don't. You just have to be
consistent.
Yeah,
that's it. That's the hardest.
Avoid those zeros. Avoid the zeros.
Avoid the zeros, man. I blew past that already.
That's all right. You won it last year.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit over halfway. So Tommy, I don't know if you want to go into the 10 rapid fire questions right now. Knock those out.
If Tom from Brooklyn's ready to do this, let's do it.
Okay.
And you have to tell the truth. And
okay.
There might be some right or wrong answers. We'll see. Okay.
Right.
You ready to do this?
Yes.
Okay. So I thought you were a title ace, so maybe this question isn't as relevant. I was going to ask you first question. What's one bait, irregardless time of year?
Jerk bait.
Spinner bait on Taylor Fishery, spinner bait.
Jerk bait.
Oh, jerkbait on title.
Oh, you said title?
Title. Yeah.
Oh, title. Okay, title. One bait.
Every time it's picked up, you got to have it in your boat. Yep.
Any time of year?
Yep.
You got to be that rat.
No. See, anytime of year is tough. Okay, so any time of year, I would say a jig.
Jig. Okay.
Yeah, little
All
finesse jig.
We'll stay on title fishing. If you had a choice, do you run the tides or you just stay put in one spot? I think you kind of already answered the question. Stay. You're one of those grinders.
Stay. And the reason to stay is simple. Unless you know the tide real well, unless you're really in tune with it, which is hard for guys that come and practice for only 3 or 4 days. They think they're in tune with it, but it's hard, man. I'm telling you. And the tide, again, gets held back, gets pushed. It does weird things. It's never actually doing what it's supposed to be doing most of the time. So if you stay, it's the safer play.
Yeah.
If you found fish in that area.
Like I said, I don't know nothing about title fishing, but I fished the Chesapeake one time, a Bass Open, and it was a horrible tournament, horrible conditions, and it was just, I found a fish in a community hole that everyone else found, and I ended up making the cut, and I think half the guys that made the cut, we were fishing the same community hole, and we get there the last day, and the first 2 days we all stayed put because if you stepped out of your spot, you wouldn't get it back. So the last day, there was only like 5 of us, and we're all hanging out, and the bite was it was bad the first 2 days. It was horrible this last day. Like, we're not even getting bit, and it gets to about lunchtime, and 4 of us just bail. Like, I just went somewhere random. So does the other guys. One guy stayed. We all came back. None of us caught anything. We all came back like an hour before weighing. And the guy that stayed was like, "You guys missed. I just caught 20 pounds in 10 minutes." And we were all like, "Oh my
100%.
God." And
100%.
we had all stayed the first 2 days, and we blew it. We left. So I get
100%.
Yeah.
You have to stay. I mean, you can run the tide like Mike Iaconelli talks about running the tide all the time.
You gotta know what you're doing, though.
You really, really have to know what you're doing, because he makes it seem like when he talks about it, he's like, "Oh, just run the tide. Run the tide." Yeah. It's not that easy. You're gonna leave too early. You're gonna get there too late. Whatever it is, that window, it's super easy to miss that window. And when you get to where you're going, you better know if you're there. Like, you better know if you missed it or you haven't missed it yet. That's the other thing. Yeah. So you really better know what you're doing if you're gonna run the tide.
Right.
And since I don't feel comfortable, I just stay. And you'll be surprised. In my mind, I'll be like, it's supposed to turn on at, let's say, 11:30, right? 11:30 comes, it's not on. So if I ran the tide and I got there at 11:30 like I wanted to, I'm like, why? Nothing's happening, right? But then because I didn't leave, because I stay, it happens at 12:30, like an hour later, whatever it is. But if I'm running the tide, I get there at 11:30, nothing's happening. I'm off to my next spot, and I missed that 12:30 bite. I mean, you better really know what you're doing if you're gonna run the tide.
Gotcha. All right, question 3. So you fished the Northeast Trail of BFL, so you're traveling all over the place. There's probably 12 hours between Thousand Islands and Potomac. You go all over the place.
A lot, yeah.
What's your favorite place on all this stops you've made? Favorite place to stay on the road?
Ooh, my house, my satellite house.
That works.
Yeah,
that works.
It's okay. I think time wise, it's probably check this out. It's 4 hours from Champlain. It's 2.5 hours from Oneida. It's about 3 hours from Cayuga. It's about 5 hours. Yeah, it's about 5 hours from St. Lawrence River, right? And
so you're that guy. You're that one guy that's like centrally located, because we've always talked about it. It's so hard to fish these tournaments. From up north, you got to go down the Potomac. From down there, you're like that guy that's right in between.
Now check this out. My house in New York is 2 hours from the Chesapeake Bay, through 3.5, 4 hours from Potomac, 6 hours from the James River.
It's perfect.
And
Perfect
45
spot.
minutes from Candlewood, and
There you
about
go.
an hour from the Hudson River, Kingston Lawn.
Gotcha. All right, next question. Do you like tough grinder derbies or complete blowouts? Because
Tough.
you like tough. You like them tough.
5
Yep.
bites.
There you go.
Tough.
That's that Jersey in you.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a question for you. Like I said, I checked out your Instagram. You have some crazy baits. What do you think is worth more, your bait collection or your wife's wardrobe?
My bait collection.
Yeah. I
Hey, maybe 10 years, maybe like 5 years ago, it was my wife's wardrobe, but all she does is work and take care of the baby now.
Yeah.
So, and she wears scrubs to work.
And you're still buying rats. You're still going online and buying rats from Japan.
Yeah, and we don't. And then COVID happened. We don't go anywhere. We don't really do anything. We haven't been going anywhere, doing anything. So she's like, "What am I gonna buy new clothes for? I don't need any." But I need baits. You always need baits.
You got some. It looks like some crazy crankbaits too. Did you some of them you don't even use? You just kind of collect, or?
The WECs I collect. I throw the E1s, the square bill E1. I'll throw those. I'm not a crankbait fisherman though. Like for me to throw a crankbait, I gotta get on some kind of weird like pattern that I'm throwing crankbaits, and I kind of got on that on the James River a little bit for the regional. A little bit too late. I got on that. I have to be more. It's part of my game that I'm working on is trying to be more incorporated, like hard baits, crankbaits, especially because I throw a lot of jigs and soft plastics and I kind of ignore crankbaits, but there's definitely times where the crankbait will outfish anything in your boat.
Yep. All right. So on this Northeast Trail, you fished a bunch of different lakes over the years. What's one body of water that you wouldn't mind never fishing again? Like what's your absolute nemesis out there?
The Chesapeake Bay.
Okay.
The Chesapeake Bay.
Like I said, I thought you were this tidal guy who would come in. You're like, I hate tidal fishing. The Chesapeake Bay sucks.
Chesapeake Bay is the toughest, pound for pound. The Chesapeake Bay is the toughest fishery that we fish.
Gotcha.
It's super local, heavy in terms of doing well. The locals there, they love it. They'll never say a bad thing about it. And every once in a while, you'll see them come in with like one fish, and you're like, "How did?" Well, you know a place is tough where guys that have won multiple big events on that place come in with one fish,
right?
Just randomly, like a random tournament, and they come in with one fish, and you're like, "Dude, like if you can have a day like that out here, I have no shot at being consistent here. Just no shot." You know what I mean? That place gets people, and that's how we talk about it. We're like, the Bay got it. Like when I zeroed, I'm like, the Bay got me. I've zeroed twice there now. It's
a lot different than like Lake Champlain, where like I caught 16 pounds this week and I was almost in tears. I was like, this is the worst day of my life. I caught 16 pounds. I stuck.
Yeah, but it's not even remotely comparable, because the Bay will make like the Bay. I think I cried a little bit too. Like I was like, I can't get bit.
Yeah, takes a part of your soul.
It's so bad. It's so bad. My co-angler. So about this, this last Bay event, when I zeroed, I'm fishing this big flat, just community. Everything's community there, community hole, and my co-angler. It was the first BFL he's ever fished, ever, and he's like, "Man, I'm just happy to be out here." Just casts out. He's like, "Oh, I think I got a catfish," and it's like a 3.5 pounder. Yeah. So he weighs in 5 for 14.5 pounds and comes in 8th place. And I never got bit.
Oh yeah, that's the worst.
We've been there before.
Yeah. All right, next question. What's worse, city traffic or fishing a community hole?
City traffic.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of like fishing community holes. You grind it out on them.
City traffic. City
Yeah.
traffic is
Yeah.
I don't like community homes. I try to avoid them if I can. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. Like the Chesapeake Bay. When you look at it on the map and you see this huge fishery with all these arms and like, you know, the Sassafras and the Susquehanna River, right? It fishes like so small. You just get 90% of the field is literally within eyesight of you the entire tournament. And the 10% that and half of those will be in the top 10, and then the other half of the 10% that you didn't see is going to be in the top, and is going to be finish out that top 10. So you gotta definitely know what you're doing over there.
All right, next question. Going back to the diversity of the fisheries on the Northeast Trail, would you rather fish grass or hard cover?
Grass, always grass.
Grass guy, okay.
Grass.
One angler you would pick to spend a day fishing with?
Gerald Swindle.
Yeah.
Yeah, only because it'll be like hanging out with a comedian.
Right. Gotcha. All right, this last question, and there is a right or wrong answer to this one, and you should know your audience here. You're gonna get a free playoff ticket for the Islanders, the Nets. Who are you taking?
Islanders.
Oh yeah, okay, you got it right. You passed. Flying
Islanders.
colors, man.
Yeah.
Who would pass up Nassau Coliseum right now? That is just bananas, right? It's like the 80s right now.
I'm telling you, if you're a New York guy, you're not really a Nets fan. You're a Knicks fan. That's just, just because they brought them over to us from New Jersey it's not gonna make us Nets fans. We're Knicks fans.
Yeah, even though you're Tom from Brooklyn, you're still going with the Islanders. Gotcha.
I am going with the Islanders.
We got, I don't know, about 10 minutes left here, Tom. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on in 2021 for tournaments and anything else you got going on, sponsors, any of that stuff.
Well, I'm still mentally recovering from that 0, right? So I've been needing a lot of therapy on that.
You're a pharmacist, so you must have some type of chemical fix for that.
Yeah. I'm self-medicating. It's bad.
Medicated out.
It's bad. It's funny. When I came back, I took everything out of my boat, right? I just took everything out of my boat, laid it all out in the garage. I'm just like staring at it. Like, do I burn this? Do I keep it? It was bad. I was just, and then I took the time that I have until my next tournament, which is in July. It's a Toyota Series event on Champlain. And I work my boat, it does its, I put it through its paces. So I wanted to make sure everything was kind of like tight, fixed, checked, double checked, and ready to go for Champlain. So I brought it over to Thayer's Marine and Richie over there.
Yeah.
And had them do a little R&R on it. And I'm gonna go pick it up this week and start fishing. So I actually haven't fished for about 3 or 4 weeks, which for me is like an eternity. Yeah. But I feel like I needed it. I needed that break, just like step away and just not even like look at my boat, think about fishing. And what that's done now is I'm super excited to go to Champlain. I can't wait. I can't wait for the Toyota Series event. And then I have the Champlain event, the BFL.
When you come up there, just take it easy on me, all right? I mean, have a good event, but don't do too well.
Why are you fishing the Toyota Series?
I'll be fishing it. Yeah.
Nice. There we go.
Watch out for the rat, Chris. The rat's gonna be swimming around.
It's gonna get me.
Hey, I fully intend on throwing that thing. You heard it here first. Like,
that's awesome.
I fully intend on throwing that thing. There's gonna be at least 45 minutes, an hour. That thing is in the water. When there's big fish around, I throw it. I'm not scared to throw it. I throw it.
Do you think they think it's actually like a rat or something, or does it look like a big bait fish or something? What do you think? Is it just something they want to eat? Like, what is it?
I don't know, man. I think the biggest fish love big top waters. That's just what I think. I mean, it doesn't have to be a rat. It could be any kind of. I have ridiculously, weird top waters, but I don't think it has to be a rat. One of my biggest big fish producers. I mean, think about it. What do guys say about big fish baits? Buzz bait, right? Like buzz bait is one of the most popular big fish baits out there. And big walking baits, right? So out of all the big fish baits, let's say we look at 5 of all-time big fish baits. 3 out of those 5 are topwater baits. There's a reason for that. Yeah. You got a glide bait is another, and a bulky jig is another, right? But the other 3 baits are topwater baits. So I feel like the biggest fish, they can't pass up a big topwater bait. But I also feel like you can't be throwing it in like 40 feet of water. Like it's gotta be somewhat of a grass flat or something like that. Maybe around like hardwood. You wouldn't believe how many fish follow that thing. Getting them to bite is a whole other issue, but in terms of followers, it's insane. A lot of times I'll throw it in practice, and when I see one following it, I'll actually get it away from them because I don't want to hook them. But I'll mark it and I'll see where he came from. So maybe he came from like a little lay down, or if he came out of like a patch of grass or whatever, I'll mark it. And then tournament day, I'll come through there with something more, like fishable, like a jig or a Senko or something. But you'd be amazed. Like he followed that big bait, but there's no response to a Senko or a jig, nothing.
Yeah, I've actually heard Steve Kennedy, the guy in the Elite Series, he's talked about when he practices, he throws this giant swim bait, and he says he's just hunting for fish in practice. He just wants the fish to show himself, and he says that big swim bait, they'll shark it, and he'll go back. He'll go back. He'll hunt that same fish and catch in the tournament. So
same thing. I just have my biggest thing was when I spoke to a couple of those big fish hunters out of California. And the first thing I asked them when I saw him, I was like, "Hey, man, dude, what do you do when you're throwing your big baits, right? And you see this fish follow it, and now your cast is over, and now the fish sees you, and he goes under your boat." I'm like, "Is that fish catchable?" And they all say the same thing. No, not right there, right then. He's like, you got to go on with your day and maybe come back and see if he reposition himself. So that happens a lot with the baits the big baits that I'll throw. That happens a lot, and it just shows you the potential of the body of water that you're fishing. Because you're like, man, there's so many big fish around, and it's like getting them to bite is a whole other problem.
Right.
Well, when you come up to Champlain, Tom, just a recommendation for you. I think you should spend a good amount of time during practice and the tournament at the Naked Turtle. It's a good bar in Plattsburgh. Just spend some time there, and don't fish too much.
There's some rats there. You'll find some there actually. Different kind of rat, but
yeah.
So are you doing the full Toyota series, or you're just mixing that in with the BFLs?
No, I'm doing the full. So it's going to be Champlain, St. Lawrence River, and the Potomac.
Yeah.
So you're kind of making that progression. Angler of the Year BFL last year. Now you're stepping up to Toyota. Is there an end game in this, or is it just you're just taking it year by year?
There is an end game. I definitely want to fish a professional tour for sure. I want to get a touring card. I want to tour. I want to get my ass kicked, going further south. You know what I mean? Like, I definitely want that experience. And that's, it goes back to just my drive of constantly wanting to fish, new water and challenge myself in new ways. So I definitely, like, if I can qualify for a pro tour, I would probably do it.
Nice.
I would do it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we're just I think we're winding down here. We got a couple minutes left. Tommy, anything else for Tom or Tommy?
So I got questions for you guys. What are you guys
go
doing?
ahead.
So Chris, you're doing the Toyota series. Tom, what are you doing?
I got a couple kids now. I've kind of cut back on those bigger tournaments. I just don't really have the time now. I used to fish some of them back in the day, but I just kind of do local stuff now. I mean, you live on a body of water like Champlain. It's hard to go. But I was like you back in the day. I wanted to go to all these different bodies of water. But now I'm more of you're gone for a couple of days, you miss the kids. It's just one of those things. So I'm more of a stick around local guy, and I let Chris chase around the big money events. So
I don't. I'm doing the same thing though, Tom. I was right out of college, and my dad and I would do the whole Northeast BFL circuit and travel all over. And at that time, we talked about this last episode. It was the top guys were like Jamie Hartman and Tom LaVictory was right up there, and I was in the mix a little bit. And my dad said to me one day, he said, Chris, like probably the best way to do it is to stay local, limit your expenses and try and capitalize as much as you can on your home lake, which is for me and Tommy is Champlain, obviously. So I don't travel much this year. I'm just doing the 4 Champlain Bass Series events, the Toyota Series. I'll do the ABA this weekend, bunch of team opens, and I kind of just stick on Champlain now. So
where in Champlain are you guys?
I'm close to Thayer, like the south end, and Tommy's up on the north end.
Yeah, I'm on northern. I live basically the inland sea. That's actually where I grew up. I grew up in St. Albans, so I moved back here after I lived in Boston for 4 years, and I moved back. I'm in the area now, same area I grew up in. So
St. Albans Bay, right? Like that.
Oh, same as St. Albans Bay.
I fished in there a couple of years ago.
There's some fish in there.
Yeah, I didn't do too well in there, and I was surprised. I'm like, there's supposed to be fish in here. What's going on?
Yeah,
it's a blessing.
Find a guy named JJ Judd and follow him around if you're in St. Albans Bay.
Yeah.
You won't mind.
It's really a blessing and a curse to live here. Like Tommy knows, like we're spoiled, and the fishing is obviously so incredible that like it's hard to want to go anywhere else. And you get a little bit not complacent, but just a little bit comfortable because it's just so good and so enjoyable and so beautiful that it's like why travel and why like put yourself through it. But if you want to take the next step, you do have to do that. So and I know Tommy's probably not interested in doing that now, and I kind of was for a little bit, but I've kind of scaled back a bit, and I'm fine with the local stuff right now. But
like I was talking about earlier, I mean, I think you're doing it the right way. Like I said, the Northeast BFL is, like I said, for that lowest level as far as Major League Fishing goes, that's the most diverse trail they have. If you can win an angler there, you're ready for obviously Toyota Series, and then you're taking a step. So,
and there's some guys. I mean, like I think Joe Zombeck still does the BFLs, right? Do you know Joe at all?
Oh, Joe's a hammer.
Joe's a hammer. Like when I was doing them back in 06, 07, I think is when I started doing them. Joe was like a stick then, and he's been at it forever. And like there's some really stiff competition on that trail. So like credit to you on that Angler of the Year. Like that's tough to do in that circuit for sure.
Well, if I was in Champlain, I don't know, it'd be hard for me to go anywhere either, because you guys have the best fishery in America, honestly. I mean, when the elites come by, these guys are from all over the country, and they all say the same thing. What's your favorite lake? Oh, Lake Champlain. They don't hesitate.
Yeah, it's a pretty special place. I fished a tournament on this past Sunday, and 5 fish. I had over 20.02 pounds, I think, and I was 4th place. There was two 21.5 pound bags, like, crazy weights.
So let me ask you something. Over the last couple of years, we have seen a decline in what the Thai puts out. What would be the reasonings for that?
Tournaments,
because they're getting driven up to
I think it's a mix.
Plattsburgh and released?
Yeah, I'm sure other people might have different thoughts. I think it's a mix. I think it's the relocation of fish to Plattsburgh. I think it's just the pressure of the fish that are still down there. I think it's just a tougher bite, and I think the alewives too have probably driven some fish maybe offshore or in a different maybe behaviors, feeding patterns, all that stuff. So I think it's a mix of things. Tommy, I don't know what you think, but
I just think it's so much smaller of an area that you're right. The pressure of moving fish, it's just going through a cycle right now. I mean, I'm no Thai expert, but when I first started fishing it, it was very tough.
You've won some tournaments in Thai though, like you.
Well,
saw
it was when I first started fishing, it was tough, and then all of a sudden, it was nuts. I don't know if Tom, if you fished there in earlier 2000, or I would say probably around 2008 to 2010.
Yeah.
It was nuts down there. It was like it was on, and everyone was whacking them though. Like we'd have a Toyota Series event. There'd be 150 boats. There'd be 120 of us running down a Thai, and we were all crushing them. And like Chris said, you're all bringing those fish back. And there's some other stuff going on too. Like the grass changes constantly. We had a hurricane one year that wiped out a bunch of grass. So I think it's just a smaller, it's not huge like up northern part of the lake that you have small changes like moving fish or the grass changes, and it has a lot bigger impact and a lot longer for it to cycle back to where it was. But you never know. We could get a couple of high water years. They got some good fish spawns, and it could be back.
You get these, so you get this in your head, this historical information, and then you go and you try to replicate it. I remember the first time I went to Thai with all these thoughts in my head from like all these guys, all these tournaments, all these boats running down there, and everybody coming back with 20 pounds. Everybody coming back with 20 pounds. And they're like, it's the easiest thing you can do is go to Thai and catch 20 pounds. And I get there, and I'm like, I can't get a bite. I'm like, I don't understand. I thought this place was magical, And I spent, this was probably a Toyota Series event, and I spent a couple of days just beating my brains in on that side of the lake. And then on tournament day, I was like, I'm not going there. Like, and I just went and I caught, 12, 13 pounds of smallmouth or whatever I ended up doing. But of all the guys that went, that it did end up going, let's say there were like 20 boats, only 20 boats that went out of a field of 200. Only 3 of those 20 boats caught fish.
Yeah.
And
only
one was the one that caught over 20.
Yeah, that's the thing. It is still tough now, but there's still obviously a handful of guys that still go down or live down there that still crush them. And they're probably happy it's tougher now because they can still catch that 20-pound bag while a lot of other people can't.
Yeah, so. And a lot of other guys go down there with that historical information of, hey, this place should produce. And it's just not, it hasn't been producing the way it's supposed to be or the way it has been in the past.
Yeah, it's definitely not the same as it was. I mean, I remember being a young teenager. I was fishing a Wednesday night tournament with my dad, and we didn't have a great night. And he pulled into a little grass bed with half an hour left, and it was every single flip. He would catch on every single flip for half an hour, and all I did was get the net and deal with the fish and get him in the live well and weigh him. It was incredible, and you just don't see those schools like you used to, So it's kind of tough, but like Tommy said, there's still always a little gem where, 1 or 2 guys, catch them really good. So, but well, it's really great, Tom, to have you on. We're going to wrap things up now, kind of going a little bit long here, but really appreciate having you. Wish you all the best the rest of the year in 2021. We'll be following you. Maybe we'll reconnect and have you on again kind of at the end of the season. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you for having me. Tom, it was a pleasure.
Hey man, one more question.
Yeah.
Are you the best bass fisherman from Georgia?
Absolutely.
The country of Georgia. Is there anyone else in is it Republic of Georgia or country? Is it Republic?
I will self-proclaim myself not only the best bass fisherman in Georgia, but also in Brooklyn.
Oh man, you got 2 boroughs covered.
I don't think there's a better one in Brooklyn.
You're probably right. That's pretty good stuff.
Staking your claim. That's a good brand to have too, Tom. Tom from Brooklyn. Yeah. So thanks again to Tom Balachvilli. I think I've said it right. The 2020 Northeast BFL Angler of the Year. Again, this is episode 4 of the Northeast Bass Fishing Podcast, brought to you by Thayer's Marine. Thayer's Marine, located in Norwich, Connecticut, is the premier dealer in the Northeast for freshwater fishing boat service and accessories. Your source for Ranger, Triton, Nitro, Camus, Blazer, Lund, Bayliner, and Tracker. Get there first with Thayer's Marine. Thanks again to Tom Balachvilli, Tommy Waltz. It's been fun again, and we'll catch everybody on the 5th episode of the Northeast Bass Fishing Podcast. Good luck on the water.